Alright, so today I'm going to be putting together the pistons, rods, gapping the rings, and all that fun stuff. So, a lot more tedious than I thought it was going to be. At this point I've already gone through and I've weighed the rods, I've weighed the pistons, weighed the ring sets to verify that they're all the same weight, or that they're all equal weights. So that's all done. I only had to end up taking off some material on one of the pistons to make it match the other three. Apparently the birds are really excited today. Alright, so there's 3 sets of rings. I guess you can call them sets. There's a top ring, a mid ring, and then there's your oil control set, which consists of a top rail, a bottom rail, and whatever the squiggly little bit is called. Generally, you don't have to gap the oil control section. They're usually in spec. In my case, I think I will just a little bit because I am going for a slightly loose build since it will be forced induction. So I'm just going to put a little bit of 30 weight inside the bore and around the ring. And I'm just going to stick the ring in there. I'm going to use a piston to square the ring up inside the cylinder bore. Carefully. It's a little further down than it needs to be. There we go. As you can see the ring in there, you can just barely see the gap. I'm going to take my feeler gauge and insert that as really tight. So I'm shooting for a gap of about 20 thousandths. Right now I'm at about 1.4 or 14 thousandths. There we go. Yes, right now I'm at about 14,000, so I got quite a bit of material to take off. Now, the method for removing material varies. You can use one of those fancy little hand crank wheels. They're usually about 60 bucks. You can take a file, put that in a vise, and then just run the edge of the rings against the file to take off material. Turns out it's really tedious, so I choose to use a Dremel. Now, the only thing really wrong with using a Dremel is that you can take off too much too fast, so you have to be really careful with what you're doing. Go back into the block. Square the ring up. And after it's squared up, you remeasure. See how much you took off. If you have a set of old rings, you know, from the previous build or from the engine you obviously tore down, and you plan to use a Dremel, it's probably a good idea to practice on those so you get a good feel for how much you can, about 18 thou. So we're good in there. Probably closer to 17 thou actually. Yeah, we're at about 17 thou right now. A little bit more. We're nearly at 19, so just a little bit more. Perfect. Yep. Let me make sure I didn't go too big. So, yeah, that's what I meant by using a Dremel. It's really easy to overshoot. I'm actually at like 21 thou, but hey, I'm good with it. So the next I'm going to do the second ring, basically the exact same process. This one's already kind of wide. Yep, this one's at about 18 thou. So 19. It's a snug 19. Yep, that should be good. Now, these are the oil rings. Or the oil rails. They are very, very tiny, and they're really hard to get a good measurement on because they're so thin. I just want to make sure they're at least 17 thousandths. Yeah, so they're good. Cool. Alright, so you have your top compression ring, your second compression ring, then you have your oil set that consists of two rails and a whatever that thing's called. So I couldn't find any real specifications for the orientation of the ring gaps on the piston face. So I'm just going by basically what everyone else in the industry says, which is 45 degrees off center. So I'll have my top ring set at 45, my second ring 45 in the opposite direction, and then with my oil rail I'll have the brake in this guy set right over the pin, with each of the gaps in the oil rails at 45 and 45. So, you know, once your piston is nice and clean and you're sure there's no debris, you can take your rail. So this goes on the very bottom. There's a little brake, a little you see there's a little wire that runs in between there to keep it together. So this will go in. There's also a little bit of paint to mark where that brake is on there. So you just spread that, slide that down, and that goes on the very bottom. Then you take your first rail. It's kind of tricky, kind of not. You have to make sure you can't really go bending and twisting these things in ways they're not supposed to bend and twist, because you will break them or bend them in a fashion to where they won't return to normal. So I like to go this method, kind of a corkscrew. It's the easiest way to get these things on. slider on, and easy as that. I'm going to try and, it's impossible for you to see that gap, but basically what I'm doing is I'm sliding that gap around so that it's about 45 degrees off the center line of the piston. Then you do your second one, and that goes on top of the oil control set. Same type of fashion. Try not to scratch the piston. It's a little more than 45. Cool. Alright, and I'm going to do my second compression. I'm going to go ahead and do my second compression ring. Do 45 in that direction. So I'm going to starter. These are a little harder, they don't twist nearly as easily, but same type of concept. Like I said, they make tools. They make a set of pliers that you can use to spread them. You know, unless you're doing this all day, every day, I personally don't think the tools are really necessary. Alright, so we can go ahead and we can add the top ring and make sure it's facing up. Just like so. So now your rings are on your piston. So we can take our wrist pin retention clip, or spring, or whatever you want to call it, and go ahead and put one on one end. You can use assembly lube, or you can use just your standard 40 weight oil. I think I'm going to go with assembly lube because I don't know how long it's going to take me before I actually get around to ever actually putting this thing together or getting it running. So I'm just going to lube the inside. Not anything excessive, just enough. I guess I probably should have looped that before I put the pin in. And I'm going to take my rod, same thing. And I'm going to take my pin and slather that up. So these rods are non-directional. There really isn't a front or a back, so you can really put them in either way. I would just recommend making sure that they're all in the same direction. No real reason for that I can think of other than being OCD a little bit. It should just slide in there. Should be a fairly loose fit because it's a floating pin. we go. Put in our there we go. And the only other step oh god, don't drop your very expensive rod bearings. Take your rod bearings, you'll see a little indentation there. See a little bit of an indentation there. There's an indentation on the bearing. Well, first make sure this is nice and clean. Also make sure the back of the bearing's nice and clean. Slide it on in there. Same thing with the cap. Just using a little brake cleaner on a towel. There we go. And that's that. That's pretty much ready to drop into the block. 2 more to go. Alright, so now that I got the rods all prepped, or pistons and rods all prepped, rings installed, I'm going to go ahead and prep them to be dropped in the block. So yeah, I already got the bearings in there, just need to lube them up, do a little machine oil on the bearing surfaces there, or do a little assembly oil, assembly lube. That's fun. So yeah, just going to apply a little bit of assembly lube to those bearing surfaces, get them nice and coated up. I'm not going to use assembly lube on the rings because I heard that you're not supposed to. So just going to use a little bit of 40 weight or 30 weight. 5W30 I got sitting around. I'll use that on the rings, on the piston skirts and whatnot. Before I put the compressor on these guys, I'm going to make sure that my ring gaps are where I want them to be, and that's about 45 degrees off center. The rings are going to move around once they're, once the engine's operational anyways, but just want to make sure that for the initial setup they're in a good position. So even though I didn't use assembly lube on the rings, I am going to use it on the cylinder bore. Not really sure why, it just seems like a good idea. Alright, you want to make sure your piston's facing forward, and that your rod isn't going to interfere with the crank. Get that lined up. I'm just going to use the handle of my hammer to gently tap that into place. I'm not applying a whole lot of force. There we go. And yeah. Go ahead, spin her over. I'm just going to apply a little bit of assembly lube to the crank pin here. You can never have too much lube. Pistons in there snug. Then the threads of your bolts, they should be lubricated. The threads, and as well as under the head bolt, or the bolt head. And of course, you want to make sure you don't put your cap on backwards. Both of these indentations should be on the same side. There's one on the rod and one on the cap. They should line up, or they should be on the same side. Take your lubricated bolt. And these should be torqued to about 43 foot-pounds.
Alright, that should do it for today.